one from Asheville, North Carolina, one from Charleston, one from Delray Beach, and another from Steamboat Springs, Yampa Valley, Colorado. So we had a panelist discussion with our public planning committee to gain additional insights and direction on the effort. We also worked through a policy decision matrix with
This meeting is being broadcast on Facebook Live.
Starting with some questions that were generated through some public meetings. We asked council for additional input and questions that needed to be answered throughout the effort. We learned along the way and gained additional clarity from staff research, from input from the committee, and then ultimately for town council, and use that information to frame our work with Lisa Sturdivant, a consultant that was brought on board to help us with our local effort. We took advantage of the county's housing needs assessment that was underway, and then further refined that and clarified that with our local effort. Jennifer was the point person working with Lisa Sturdivant on our important local effort and development of a strategic plan, which led us to 8 recommendations. As we move through discussion today, there'll be a lot of similar questions that we have fielded before, but I think it's important for our council to help identify what is our role going forward. We have made some progress on some initiatives, and there's further work to be done. But if we can identify what the town's role should be in the regulatory environment, financial environment, and partnership environment, I think it will be helpful to help clarify the program going forward. So I wanted to provide that overview and context, and I'll let Jennifer run through a more detailed presentation at this point.
Thank you, Sean. I'm going to share my screen now. I just have a brief presentation. Can you see the PowerPoint?
We see your presentation screen.
Let's just go through it this way if this works for you. So I was part of the staff team. It wasn't just me as a lead. Terry Lewis is on the call too. Marcy Benson, Jamie Lopko, and Sean and I all participated. We've been working on studying and addressing workforce housing on the island. I'm just going to give you a brief update on the status of the initiative, and then ask for some input from town council on the strategic direction moving forward. As Sean mentioned, we've been working on this since 2017 through a series of, I think we counted 35 meetings and workshops. It has been iterative. It did include a lot of research and best practices. As he mentioned, Lisa Sturdivant was hired in August of 2018. Council adopted the strategic plan in November of 2019. We did develop the policy framework. It had a lot of good questions that helped develop that policy and then focus the scope of work for our consultant. So there were 8 recommendations as part of that strategic plan. They included the Housing Trust Fund, commercial reuse policy, use of town-owned land, a density bonus program, employer-assisted housing, tax and impact fee rebates, home link and home sharing, and then low-income housing tax credit. From that report, there were 4 items that town council supported in some form, some positive support for a housing trust fund, for commercial reuse policy, for use of town-owned land, and for a density bonus program. These are, like I said, policy changes that council supported that would create an environment for the right kind of private investment. Those were the pieces that y'all asked us to focus on initially. I'm going to go over the current progress on 3 of those 4. The 4th piece that's not on the screen right now is the use of town-owned property. It was generally supported, but we have not been given a clear direction yet or identification of sites. So that one has not been progressing like the others, but I'm going to give you a little bit more detail on where these other 3 pieces stand today. So the Housing Trust Fund is a regional effort led by the county. We started working through Soloco. Initially, we had a small steering committee there, and then now it's a county-led effort that includes both Beaufort and Jasper counties and many of the municipalities. There's a consultant, Asakura Robinson, out of Austin, Texas, that is working with us. They expect to have the report done by the end of this fiscal year, and it will outline the components needed to have a good regional housing trust fund. At that point, after it goes back to Soloco and it'll come to town council to decide if you all want to participate and what that participation would look like. But that is an ongoing, we meet at least monthly throughout the past 4 or 5 months. Another one of the policies that we've made progress on is commercial conversion. That was adopted in November of 2020. As you know, there's a lot of underutilized or vacant commercial space on the island, and town council supported the reuse of that. So far, we have not gotten any applications, but we have gotten several inquiries. Jamie Lotko is the keeper of a log we put together, so any staff that receives an inquiry, we're logging it so that we can keep track of making sure we're giving the same info out and who's asking. Any applications that come in, we will bring that report to town council and make sure that you're aware of any true applications in either commercial conversion, or the other piece is the density bonus program. That one was just adopted earlier this year. If you recall, we looked at parcels that were zoned RM4, at least 3 acres, and had some exclusions with group living. And again, we have not received applications yet on that one either. So here again on the screen are the 8 recommendations. We've briefly touched on the first 4. Number 3, again, make use of town-owned land available. We have gotten some support, not really consensus. Maybe we can get some direction on that today. 5 through 8, we did not have good support before. They were things that aren't really policy related, things that require use of funds or land. We have seen some changes to the QAP that's related to low income housing tax credit projects, and have heard from local developers that they could make it work if they can get enough units, that we are more competitive than we have ever been. The tax and impact fee rebates, that is a possibility. We would, town council would need to have another fund to pay those fees out of. But we'd like to get some input today on these others to see what direction you'd like to move in. Before I open it up, I just want to remind you of some prior success that we've had in the workforce housing arena with Habitat for Humanity. We've had a successful partnership and have completed 16 units in phase 1, 6 units out of 16 are completed in phase 2. You know, that project is located off Marshland Road on Alex Patterson Road. We asked for your input in advance of this workshop, and honestly, is a good mix of questions and comments and concerns. A lot of it is very similar to the comments, questions, and concerns that we received when we started back in 2017 and that we've worked through along the way. I'm not going to read this to you, just want to make sure that you see that, you know, we got your input, and there's a lot of good questions up here. Some of these things will require additional information, like this one here, Regional Housing Trust Fund aligned with the core values. As I said, we'll bring that forward to you when the consultant has made a recommendation, and town council will be able to decide if it aligns with the core values and if you want to participate. There's a question about what needed to attract a qualified workforce. There's a lot of factors there, a lot of components. So some good comments and questions. Questions about process, promotion of this. Do people know? I think the developers know because we do get quite a few calls. Some questions about challenges and market. We right now, with question about manufactured homes, there are a lot of challenges on the island with ownership, and now that there's sewer access, we have seen an increase in placement of mobile homes. And I think as long as that's cost effective and easy and is a good source of rental income, that's going to continue to be prevalent on the island. As far as economics, there's another question to point out. We can talk to some developers and do some research and bring back a pro forma on how the economics would actually work if that's something that council is interested in. But before I wrap this up and turn it back to you, these are the things that we would like some direction on today. This is your workshop. I'm just teeing it up for you. As I mentioned, 1, 2, and 4 highlighted in blue here are things that we have pursued, we have made progress on. They are the policy related items. And then the other options would be land and financial, related things. So if you want to talk about land, should we consider town-owned land? Are there criteria there? Do you have particular sites you want to look at? Is there interest in creating a fund for some of these other items and what that funding source might be and the goals of it? So at this point, that's the end of my presentation. I'm going to stop sharing the screen. I'd like to turn it over to the mayor and to walk through council members and give us some input, some strategic direction so that staff knows where you want to take the workforce housing program going forward.
Thank you, Jennifer. Mr. Brown.
So thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Sean and Jennifer, for the presentation. I know typically I go first, Mr. Mayor. I'm just curious to know, are you going to make some comments along the way also?
It's according to what you have to say, Mr. Brown. We could agree on everything. This would be wonderful.
All right, we'll start there then. Fair enough. I guess before I get into each one of the questions that Sean and Jennifer have put before us as far as regulations, the financial commitment, and partnership, I just wanted to share a perspective. I am the only member of council that represents homegrown. And I want to make sure that we are talking about this issue as a people issue, not a structure issue, not if somebody's going to be able to take your order at the restaurant issue, but a people issue. Keep in mind that our Hilton Head school cluster, 60% of those students are on free or reduced lunch. This issue that we have on Hilton Head when it comes to workforce housing is a people issue. If I had not had the blessing and pleasure of my family owning land on Hilton Head, and me myself being able to place a mobile home on a portion of that inherited land, I would not have been able to afford to live on Hilton Head when I was first starting out. And the more and more that land becomes very scarce, the more and more that we approve developments that are not for people that are working and want to live on Hilton Head, the more and more chance those working families, those people that want to make Hilton Head their home, it won't be available. I won't bore you with the amount of folks that I know that look like me and don't look like me that have to move off of Hilton Head because they can't find a place to stay. So a lot of discussions that we have around financial commitment, regulations like density, they all go back to the people that we are representing. I just want us to be mindful of that as we move forward. Now I'll go into the discussion that has been put before us. I'm glad to see that the items that staff is looking for direction on come right from the plan that we started working on over 4 years ago. From a regulatory standpoint, I've said this before. A lot of the properties in question that could potentially or are already being used for affordable housing, I think we need to be more intentional about that. I know there's an argument about density, but let's face it, majority of the available lands are either town-owned lands or lands that are vacant and are in Native Islander or long-time ownership situations. So we can't necessarily in one breath say that we don't want to give off more density and in the same breath say that we want to increase our housing stock. I mean, you can't have it both ways. And the only way that a lot of this is going to pencil out is if we fill the gap. And I think we need to be filling the gap with need and not greed. Okay? So from a regulatory standpoint, we need to be more intentional about where we're giving off density, where we're helping out as far as property tax abatement, impact fees, and that sort of thing, which leads me to the financial commitment. I know we've got a pot of money. I'm encouraging us to not only go after more money that we may be able to find federally or at the state level, but we as a town need to make a commitment to some reoccurring funds into the current fund that we have. Waiting on what's going to happen regionally, I think we need to absolutely consider that. But I think we need to control our own destiny to a degree so that we can fill some of these gaps with our own financial support. And financially, as we go into budget season, I think we take the lead on one of the recommendations, which is to be an example. I'm not sure of the numbers, but I'd like to know what percentage of our town staff lives on Hilton Head. And I'd like Mr. Orlando to have a stipend in his budget so that we can improve on that. Help him to attract folks that are looking to fill some of the vacancies that we have, fire and rescue, and even otherwise. I'm not sure of the staff commitment. I guess there's a question for Mr. Orlando, but if this is going to take up more time from a staffing point, I would want us to support him in the budget way that he can put a staff person on this for the adequate amount of time needed to do so. And lastly, the partnerships. I know that Chamber has been intimately involved in the beginning of this process. And again, we're talking about people. I think we need to re-engage, reinforce, put our own expectation on workforce development. How we retain and how we build our workforce is just as important as where we're going to live. So that conversation, I think, needs a shot in the arm. The school district, too often, again, we've got this hospitality program in place at the secondary educational level, but how are we supporting that within the Beaufort County School District? And how is the town of Hilton Head playing a role in that? And that's not necessarily a financial role, but a role of expectation and understanding, of going back again to that 60% of our students are on free and reduced lunch. And as far as how we get structures on the ground, this is another partnership. We have local developers that are trusted, that have done projects, that they themselves are suffering from the lack of skilled and talented workers. I'd like to see us work in a little deeper setting with those developers so that we can conceptually start to show the community that we can have affordable housing on Hilton Head that is Class A. I know that there's a fear of, a municipality being too involved, and we start to develop, excuse my French here, but ghettos. But let's face it, again, we're talking about people, and I'm going to end with this. I know that there's rumbles of what happens with mobile homes or manufactured homes. But the crux of the matter, ladies and gentlemen, is that works. That works. So if we want to see a better product, then I think that we as a town have to work with those that are developing their property so that there is a better product and it's still affordable. If you take a ride around Hilton Head, you can see the places that are not being converted into short-term rentals. And a lot of those are mobile homes. I'm not suggesting that our entire workforce housing program should be wrapped around mobile homes. I'm simply suggesting that if we're looking for a product that works and a price point that works, that's an example. How do we, as leaders, turn that example into something else that works? Those are my comments. I hope that I was clear to staff as to, at least from my mind, what direction we should be going. And if before you move on to the next person, Mr. Mayor, I want to make sure that there are no questions for me from Mr. Orlando or Sean or Jennifer.
Oh, I have one, Alex.
Yes.
Are you suggesting that in building housing for people, workforce housing, whatever you want to call it along the way, that we should start with our own people first instead of people that don't live here, move them in?
No, it's both, Mr. Mayor. You definitely want to attract people moving in. I can appreciate that, but there's no housing stock to do so. I'm simply suggesting that as we do that, we don't forget about what we already have. I think it's two parts. Definitely want to be attracting talent from other places, absolutely. But let's not miss the boat on the talent that's already here. What I'm saying is we're going in the other direction when you've got folks that have lived on Hilton Head and want to make Hilton Head their home, and there's no place for them to live.
Would that be your priority, Alex?
I think we can work on both at the same time.
Mark, any questions?
Councilman Brown, I don't have any questions. We just, at this point, taking notes and listening. I'm fully clear on all your points made, so I have no questions at this time, sir.
Are there any other questions for Alex? Thank you, Alex. Mr. Hawkins, you there?
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. Good. Bill, you still there? Bill, you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, let's go.
All right, you can hear. Two comments. I think not too many months ago, in a very deliberative process, we focused on 3 or 4 key areas. One is the trust fund, which I think has the potential of helping significantly on a regional basis. And that's underway, and I think we just have to be patient for that end of the fiscal year report. Next, 2 areas, commercial reuse. We know very clearly that 38% of our commercial buildings are lying idle. I was driving around by the university earlier today and looking at all of the empty buildings between the university and Riley's. And we all are familiar with other empty spaces. And the question I have is, what aren't we doing to get that word out? It was very disappointing to hear, and this is not a criticism, it's just a fact, that we have had no applicants. That to me suggests that maybe there's opportunity to come up with a much more robust, much more exciting communication program to the investor community that might take advantage of the commercial. I mean, no density limit, coming up with smaller size units, micro units. Many of those spaces inherently lend themselves to that kind of development. So the question I think we need to have answered, and fairly quickly, is what could we be doing that we're not doing? And likewise, on the density bonus program, we also have had no applicants. So I'm wondering, are we doing something wrong? Are we not communicating clearly? Are we not targeting potential individuals and groups about this? Because from their perspective, their opportunity can also be addressing what we consider to be our need. So those are my key points at this time. Thank you.
And Bill, Mark's going to work on that soon.
Yes, sir.
And he'll send whatever he's going to send that to the members of council as well. Good.
Okay.
Mr. Ames.
Mayor, may I ask your permission to follow the others? I'd like to hear where the rest of council is before I speak.
I get cheating, David. You're going to re-summarize everything.
No, I'm not going to. I've been working on this for 4 years.
Yeah, I know. This is Mrs. Becker. Tammy, you with us? Okay. Mr. Lennox.
Thank you, John. The issue that we deal with is the issue of our ability to attract a qualified workforce. Workforce development is the threat to the future relevance of the island. And I've spoken with a lot of employers, and they say that very, very quickly. The issue isn't specifically housing. Housing is one element of our ability to attract a qualified workforce. we're in an environment right now, we're in a market right now where property values are increasing exponentially. It's almost to the point that many people can't afford to live in their house because it's too valuable. And we have seen long-term rentals start to migrate towards short-term rentals where the economic benefit far exceeds the benefit from a long-term rental. That will do nothing but continue to put pressure on workforce development and using housing as an element in doing that. I worked down here when I first came in 2006 at a bank, and the bank was on the island. And back then, 15 years ago, I had to pay $2 or $3 more an hour to attract a teller to come across the bridge. So employers recognized that there was a disadvantage to trying to attract a workforce onto the island back then, and that situation has done nothing but exacerbate. So as we talk about workforce development as a threat to future relevance of the island, I think housing, transportation, education, healthcare, wages and benefits, recreation are all a part of it. And I am disappointed that we haven't gotten any more activity on the LMO amendments that we specifically put in place to facilitate workforce housing development. And I'd be interested to know, Sean and Jennifer, what the inquiries were that you got regarding the repurposing and reuse underutilized or vacant commercial spaces. I think we have to react and respond to those as best we possibly can. And Jennifer, you asked what we thought the role of local government should be in dealing with the issue of affordable housing. And I think we have taken that. I think we should first use our legislative powers, such as zoning amendments, density bonuses, waivers and variances. And I think we are in the process of doing that. Although there's not much activity yet, I think we have done what I think we can do most quickly. Beyond that, there are other issues that you have listed, not the least of which being a financial role that the town would play, be it either in the form of cash, subsidies, or land assets. I think that's something that we have to talk more about and perhaps consider as we go further, but if and only if the first and initial legislative efforts don't work or don't provide anything close to what we need. I'd also be interested in knowing what the demographics are of the 16 plus 16 Habitat for Humanity developments that seem to have been successful. Do we know that those are specifically workforce families in those homes, and are they working on the island? We've talked about the low and moderate income housing tax credits for a number of years now. And the last I recall was that we had Tom Davis and Jeff Bradley involved in seeing how much flexibility there would be in the very, very strict requirements that those tax credit programs carry. And those requirements, in essence, preclude their application to the island. I don't think there's been any activity, at least that I've heard, from those discussions that date back at least 3 or 4 years. I think in conclusion, are we prepared as a community to deal with the thought that the answer to the challenge that we have as it pertains to workforce housing might not be on the island? The answer might be on the mainland for whatever reason, lower land costs not the least of which. But as we more fully walk through the work that the county is spearheading on the regional housing trust, are we prepared as a local government to recommend participation in a regional housing trust that doesn't really think that development of a housing stock on the island is the highest and best use of their assets? That's probably a question that we're going to be faced with as we go through the process of developing or listening to recommendations on how best to develop a regional land trust.
Thank you, Tom. Glenn?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate the thoughtful comments given by, first of all, the staff and then by my colleagues here on the council. The first thing that I ask here is it known in the broader housing community that Hilton Head Island is offering incentives in the form of bonus incentives, and et cetera, to developers who want to use such a thing? I'm wondering if we all know that, but the broader market that is constructing this type of housing may not know it. And I'm not sure how we go about making that known, but I think it's important that we do that. We all know that there are conventions of various professions and those that are involved in various fields of endeavor, including, of course, housing. And I think that it would be useful to find out what those presentations are. There are probably magazines and newsletters there. Get something in there. Let's get the word out in the broader marketplace, which is a point that Bill Harkins brought up a few minutes ago. We need to understand if there could be some financial incentive to a broker type to bring such housing here to the island. No, I haven't come up with a way to structure that, but there are much better heads here than mine that could construct something like that created such an incentive. On the trust fund, I try to keep an open mind about it, but I am dubious. I am dubious because of the regional resentment that I think exists in some areas of the broader region against Hilton Head Island. I think that we could run into a situation where the idea and the approach is, well, they're all rich over there. We need the housing more than they do. And if they need it, they can afford to build it on their own. That's not to say that I'm opposed to it, but I think we need to tiptoe into this and make sure that there is a formula in such a trust fund that allocates the trust fund investments fairly to this community as well as to the other communities in the region. I'll be very interested in what this consultant has to say that's working on the trust fund and what they come forward in terms of a recommendation. I'm not sure on commercial reuse if what we have done is enough. And the market is telling us that it's not, because there hasn't been any interest in our efforts to promote commercial reuse. I noticed in the consultants in the Sturtevant report an idea of a vacant space fee. I have no idea about the legality of such a thing or the practicality of it, but that would be something in the form of a stick versus a carrot out there to try to prod the owner of an underused commercial space forward. I think we need to be prepared in commercial reuse to contemplate mixed use. That is, a building that is partially commercially occupied and partially occupied by newly developed housing units in that building. And again, I recognize that there are all kinds of governmental regulations, ADA and fire regulations and the like, that are different between housing versus commercial use. But I think we need to look into that and try to come up with ways that are, if you will, a little more creative than what we've done so far. 38% of the space on this island being vacant is a true crisis. And the reasons are manifold. It has to do with traffic, it has to do with congestion, and it has to do with the changes in the overall markets here in the region. But it is something that we need to tackle. As I recall, the real estate transfer fee creates an opportunity to the town to use some of those transfer fee funds to purchase a commercial property and then to offer it for reuse. I would like to see us develop the feasibility of such a plan so we create an incentive to the owner of a commercial structure to go ahead and unload it. I mean, I can't understand in the case of a rental commercial structure how a landlord can justify economically continuing to own the property with significant vacancy. And we're in a pretty good economy here, so there's something wrong there, and we need to identify what that is. Town-owned land. I think that we're going to have to use town-owned land to provide a location and an incentive to development of workforce housing. I believe that staff in the past has developed a map that shows as a subset of the properties that were identified for potential workforce housing. I think there's a subset in there about town-owned land. I'd like to be able to review that map again, if it exists, if I'm correct about that. And then I'd like to see us go in and try to prioritize one or two of those town-owned sites for these purposes. Now, when I say use town-owned land, I'm not talking about giving it away. I'm talking about either offering it at a bargain rate, but no less than what the town may have paid for it, or probably preferably to that, leasing that town-owned land for use for these purposes, again, at a beneficial rate to a developer so they don't have to assume the major cost of acquisition plus construction and development. Density bonuses, we're saying we haven't had any applications. I'm hearing rumblings that there are those who are looking at it, possible developers. I attended a little work session recently where there was a developer who was talking about possibly doing a site, I believe that was out on Jonesville Road, that would be 100% workforce housing. No doubt wanting to take advantage of the incentives that we've already offered. So let's not quit on that. But again, in the case of the density bonus, let's make it better known. Let's get it known to the developer community broader, and I'm sure there's some specialized groups within that could offer us the meetings, the publications, or whatever, where we can make it known that the town is trying to develop more of this land. The 9% tax credit. It's my understanding that Jeff Bradley has been successful and that he has been able to negotiate a better definition of a community or a location that would qualify for this. I, for one, need some education on what that definition is now. I'm probably derelict in not reaching out and trying to find it on my own, but I'll confess I haven't done that. But I have learned from talking to others, including David Bennett's, whose business this is, that the 9% tax credit is the primary incentive to development of this type of housing by commercial developers. And so let's figure out what this new definition is, and let's make it known that we now qualify and we want you here for more than just the 9% tax credit. But we also, by the way, have a wonderful opportunity zone here, which can offer you further tax credits and opportunities for developing of the type of housing that we want. In terms of funds that are available, we need to be working on various things, as we've already discussed. But I'm of the impression that the federal government's current incentives are going to generate some major distributions to states and then on down to local communities. We need to find out what those might be and how that might get as far as Hilton Head Island, so we know if we'll have a fund there when it is in fact adopted. That law hasn't been adopted yet, and so I see that as a potential. Finally, mobile homes. Folks, I think mobile homes are a reality on this island. Matter of fact, they're a reality throughout the South, and particularly in South Carolina. And so while placement of those can be a problem, it seems to me in some of the areas that have been identified as key areas for workforce housing, this would be appropriate because it is, I think, the least expensive form of reasonable housing for a lot of purposes. So I've randomized a lot of things here and try to give responses as sought by staff to the various key issues. And I look forward to working with staff moving forward as well as working with the council. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Mr. Ames.
Have we lost Tammy?
Tammy. Yep.
Okay. Well,
no, I'm here. I just don't have. I'm sorry.
Keep losing her.
Finish up. If I stay connected, I'd love to share some thoughts on what. And do you want me to try now, or do you want me to wait?
There's no waiting. If you can go on now, you can. But we'll try it.
Okay. All right. I've changed locations a few times. Let's see how well this works. Well, first, the thing I want to make sure that everyone is aware of who might be participating in this workshop is that I believe wholeheartedly with everything that each and every one of us here is working for each and every resident on the island. And the employers have our attention in terms of needs, and know that each thoughtful decision that is made with the best interest of the island for each and every one of them. So I just want to make sure that's clear, that that's the position that I see us all taking. And then secondly, I share Glenn's reservations with regard to the regional trust. And I will maybe start moving forward with regard to that. And I think that's enough said on that right now. In terms of commercial conversion and getting the word out, in terms of what we've placed on the table and offered to help incentivize folks to come onto the island, create that, I guess, work. Maybe that can give us normalization in terms of that work out, but I think that there's any image of communicating what we've done and reached out to those people who may have expressed an interest, I'm sure, previously, and those who come forward now. If staff believes there are other avenues that haven't been taken, and there's some reservation as to why they haven't taken that step, I'm sure that they will communicate that.
Lost her, right?
I think we did. I've been trying to connect her. I can't.
Every confidence that they're reaching out to the right corners of the of that industry and making those contacts. In terms of the quality, I guess, or the area of the island, the types of land that is used to help to create that affordable workforce. I think that's a decision that I'd like to look at more broadly in context of where those spots are. As everyone knows, I've made comments with regard to increasing numbers of mobile homes, and I think that there may be at times when they are appropriate, but perhaps in setting that in motion, if it's an effective use of land, that we ought to consider how we write into the LMO some conditions that will help to provide a quality housing through that means as well. So I think that's something that can be looked at if in fact that's somewhere that is applicable for this type of use. In terms of the transportation piece, I know what I would like to see is us develop that simultaneously along with what we're doing here. I know that the housing piece has taken a priority and has been what's been worked on, but I think that we do ourselves a disservice if we're not actively engaged in looking what that transition element that could also help with providing workers easy access or easier access to the island. I still have seen no data collected that tells me that there are X number of employees who are just clamoring at the door to find a home on Hilton Head that they want to live in. Every time we talk about these issues, we talk about we talk about micro efficiencies. We talk about how many people you can shove into a particular area, which I'm particularly bothered by. Because to me, it doesn't invite people onto the island to be part of our community, but simply to be a worker bee. And that isn't how I see it. Alex mentions thinking about people, and we ought to think about people, and so those two don't match up for me. I'm a big fan of for humanity because it gives folks the opportunity to establish their own home. And I won't go into it, but many of you who have listened to me before know that in my mind, home ownership carries a lot with it that helps to build the quality of a community and continues to help grow the quality of a family in this real future. So I'm not sure whether or not I've given you as much information as you were hoping. I am thrilled that my internet hung in there this long, and I'm not going to push my luck on it. What I will do, though, is put those items that specifically address the questions that staff had into a short memo and send it to them with my thoughts through our mayor, of course. Through our mayor and through our town manager, of course. But that's it for me for right now.
Thank you, Tammy. David?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Appreciate that and your indulgence in allowing me to listen to others. I first want to say thank you to Mark and Sean and Jennifer for teeing this up again. It's been a long process to get here. I want to lead off by reemphasizing what Alex said about let's talk people. I was at a restaurant just the other day being waited on by a bright young woman who, as I often do, responded to my question, where do you live? I live on the island. I grew up on the island. I'm living in a XYZ place now, but they're raising my rents and I'm going to have to look off island. So here's a bright young person who grew up on the island, obviously was with it. I can imagine that if she were to stay on the island, she would become an executive director of a nonprofit or in some way make a contribution to this community. So not only are we trying to attract people to the island for all the right reasons, but our policies should be allowing people who have already made a commitment to the island for one reason or another to be able to stay. So if you think about our fire rescue people, the teachers, nurses, security forces, people we depend on for our safety and welfare, and we aren't providing some modicum of effort to accommodate their housing, decent housing on this island. I think we really need to think about our position in building community. Community is built by the people who live in it. And if we are saying that we will provide housing off island, we are robbing this community of the very vitality it requires to move forward. I think we have a couple of issues. Our charge today is to give staff some direction. I will start with my summary for Mark and the staff. I think we need a dedicated staff position with accountability to move this project forward. And secondly, we need a recurring line item budget that is substantial enough to have some opportunity or chance of closing the gap between the cost of constructing housing on this island and the rent roll that can be generated from a affordable housing or workforce housing project. But I'll go into more detail on that in just a second. But let me turn now to council. We began working on this in a serious way in 2017, had a report developed in 2018, adopted that report in 2019, and I wrote the questions that I provided you via email. And I think we as a council have to say to the public, we agree there is a crisis or a challenge that we need to solve. The questions, the statements I made is we don't have enough workers, let alone qualified, trained, and motivated ones. Off-island growth is sapping the island's ability to attract workers. Lack of affordable housing is an impediment to recruiting employees. The transition of affordable housing condos to short-term rentals is depleting available workforce housing and raising rates for the remainder. And affordability will remain a challenge as long as residential and tourism demand remains high. We have roughly 23,000 workers on the island in a given day. Almost 15,000 of those are commuting. I don't think that it's realistic for us to assume that we're going to build housing for the remainder, but we ought to make a serious attempt at providing housing, certainly for our most essential workers that provide public services to this community, medical personnel and so on, and then continue to understand that the young people who come to this island to work in food and beverage may in fact transition into other businesses in this community and make serious contributions if they're given the opportunity to live on the island. If they're told or policies dictate that they live off the island, they are not going to be making a contribution to this community, to the grocery stores and other businesses on the island. So if we, Mayor, can agree with a public statement that in fact we do have workforce challenges that are staring us squarely in the face, then I think that is at least a first step for the public to say, the leadership is cognizant of the challenge and is now going to do something about it. Well, what are we going to do about it? I think the questions that I asked a couple of years ago and are still very relevant today are, can the cost of building a project versus the revenue gap be filled without public funding? Now, I've listened to different members of council today suggest maybe not. I think we as a council have to come to grips with that question and answer it in a way that we are either going to commit to moving forward with a serious commitment to build affordable housing on this island or not. I have to admit, I'm frustrated because of the lack of consensus on this council to coming to grips with that answer. The second question I would ask, should the island rely on off-island workforce housing to supply island workers? Now, again, there may be some percentage of island workers who continue to get on public transportation or drive their cars or their trucks or vans to the island every day. But I do not think it's realistic for us to assume that 100% of our employees who are currently having to travel are going to remain traveling into the future. There are just too many external factors changing the landscape for us to be able to attract the workforce. Can island quality be maintained with high development and land cost of housing? We have a challenge when we talk about trailers, mobile homes. There is a sense that mobile homes don't have the same aesthetic value as what's been built behind the gate or the town has been safeguarding in its ordinances over time. And I would proffer the suggestion that mobile homes are an inexpensive way to provide decent housing for people who might otherwise not be able to afford it, and secondarily provide a way of generating income for certain property owners. If this town is so serious about its aesthetic values, then it should be willing to contribute dollars in a way that other alternatives become viable, both from a private sector investment standpoint and from a brand standpoint on the island. Another question, which land uses are we trying to incentivize? Which ones are we trying to disincentivize? It's my opinion, and it's a strong opinion, that when we agree to upzone a property from a few dwelling units per acre to 18 dwelling units, and we are we are demanding, quote unquote, 5% affordable housing within that, we are going down an unsustainable pathway. Every house that we build that is not providing some kind of workforce component is complicating our futures, both from an infrastructure standpoint and also from a working employer standpoint. So it takes about 20 units of workforce housing to serve every 80 units of market rate housing. So the goal would be, at the very least, to maintain status quo, is we need somewhere around 25 or 30 affordability in a project. I don't think that is a good strategy for Hilton Head exclusively. I think we have to do better than that to make a serious difference. Another question, where should higher density workforce housing be located? The only way to answer that question, in my opinion, is district master planning that says this area suits a higher density because. And there are good answers for that. But it requires the planning to do it and to make the right decision. The right decisions from a community standpoint, but also the right decisions from the private developer standpoint. On the Housing Trust Fund, and Mayor, I think Council needs to answer those questions by majority vote, if not by a unanimous vote. Because without answering those questions, we are simply treading water. And we aren't making the commitment that's necessary to make a significant impact in this area. On the Housing Trust Fund, clearly it's my opinion that we need public dollars to generate the interest and close the gap between costs and revenues. And therefore, I am conceptually in favor of a housing trust fund. Perhaps a regional trust fund makes sense. But when I think of the uses of dollars, public dollars, you can do land purchase, matching funds for grants, gap financing, financial incentives for conversion of transient units to affordable housing units, repurposing distressed commercial properties, housing conservation support, fee waivers and subsidies for impact development fees, and so on and so forth. Most of those are local in use of funds. So I'm very suspicious of 100% regional trust fund. It maybe makes sense to participate, but I think we're going to have local dollars to make a significant impact here on the island. Town-owned land. I'm not sure why this one is still getting batted up in the air like a badminton birdie. We've basically had the same land now since all of this conversation began. We know that there are restrictions in some areas. We know that some land is wetlands and doesn't make sense for development. I think we should expect from staff in short order a description of the land that is available either by covenant, deed restriction, or natural conditions suitable for consideration. Again, I don't think we move forward without a commitment on the part of council that there has to be a public dollar commitment to move this significantly forward. When we talk about bonus densities and commercial property conversions, I am absolutely convinced that the reason that there isn't demand and developers knocking at our door is because they cannot close the gap simply by density. The higher density we require as a town for our benefit, the more likely it is that we aren't going to get developer interest. And the lower that percentage is, the more problems we have with our infrastructure down the road. I don't think what we have in place now is going to solve the problem. I think we have to add something to the equation that makes the financial package easier for them to create. All right, Mark, just some ideas for staff to consider. Or some pieces I think we should have a full court press and our legislators to expand the use of tax funds to include housing of one description or another, infrastructure for affordable housing, but we need tax funding legislation amended so that we can utilize those funds more productively. There is ever a connection between the source of funds, i.e. tourism, and the need for workers and service workers and employees on the island. There can't be a more direct connection. So I think tax funds funding needs to be expanded. We need to seek grants for housing, but that follows a council commitment that we're actually going to push in that direction. But I know the town manager has used grants in the past, so I'm optimistic that if we were to have a staff position for workforce housing, that component of grants would be included. If you think about houses on the island that are poorly maintained, does it make sense for this community in some way to work with the community foundation in partnership or on its own to provide some kind of maintenance on houses just so that that house lasts a little bit longer. I know they do that in Bluffton. Housing assistance programs. I heard somebody else on staff, on council mention this earlier. You know, if it's so costly to build a house for a firefighter or for a teacher, and it'll take some time to get those houses built, does it make sense for us to have some sort of housing assistance program for critical public servants? Or is it even from an innovative standpoint, should we have some sort of transitional housing program on the island which allows teachers to live somewhere on the island for at least a year just to get their feet on the ground? Or if a firefighter is hired, that person or family has a place to live for a period of time. I think also I heard that maybe we need some sort of tax incentive for people who have long-term rentals, just to keep them off the short-term rental market. I don't know how many employee housing long-term rental properties we've lost in the last 4 years. But every one of those to replace is going to be substantially more expensive than if we were trying to figure out a way to incentivize people to stay long-term in their rental posture. I think we can have a great deal more creativity in how we're looking at this. Mobile homes are really a form of a tiny home, but tiny homes are designed in a creative, clever way. And maybe tiny homes ought to be encouraged on this island in creative little campuses. And I wonder about garage units under the right circumstances. But all of those would have to be a commitment to long-term rentals and not Airbnb, VRBO opportunities. I think it's incredibly important for us to retain the workforce housing, the affordable housing that we have on the island, and our commitment to those has to be unambiguous. So, Mayor, my plea to you is for council to have a written, documented position of its appetite for pushing forward workforce housing on this island. My impression, having been chair of the Public Planning Committee now for closing 5 years, is that we talk, but we don't make a serious commitment. And if I am right, that serious commitment boils down to having a staff member accountable for progress and public dollars put in the budget to give developers an opportunity to close the gap. On the couple of comments were made on the low income tax credit. What Jeff Bradley was successful in doing was extending the mile radius around the schools to 3 miles so that it would include the opportunity zone. So yes, there is an opportunity there to do it. And people like David Bennett and other developers who have done workforce housing understand the opportunities, but also understand that it isn't a silver bullet. Affordable workforce housing requires many layers of financing, and the town being one that sets the tone. Thank you, Mayor.
Well, I thank everybody, and David, I'm glad you went last this time. I thank everybody for their input today, and I think it's an awful lot to digest. I'm going to ask Krista to call another meeting for 2 weeks from today, if it's available on everybody's calendar. But I'd like to add to next week's agenda should we consider having a referendum this November for the public to decide about workforce housing and the method of funding it? So we have a permanent method of funding it, whether that funding be a sales tax or whether that funding be an increase in the millage, but we should have a permanent method of funding it. It shouldn't be, does the town have enough money every year out of its general fund to do this? There should be a method that money only comes in for workforce housing, whether it be trailers or whether it be multi-story buildings or rehabbing old commercial space. I hate to do anything where we don't have the proper funds for a lot of years after we all leave. So besides what we talked about today, we should put on the top of the agenda for next week. Should we consider a referendum, which will all be involved in the writing of it for this fall, and we will talk about that in 2 weeks. With that, I thank you all very, very much. This has been a great meeting. Thank you.
Okay.
Are we adjourned?
Yes.
I'm going to call for an adjournment.
I need that motion to call for adjournment, okay? David?
I don't want to adjourn.
Oh, okay. Who wants to adjourn
I'd
the
like to
meeting?
hear from the town manager and what your experience, Mark, has been in Bluffton and what your knowledge is about what the broader public communities are doing to solve these problems.
Okay. Well, the one thing I know about housing is this is an issue in all great places across our country. And I do know that one size doesn't fit all. This is not the same in all places. I've had a little bit of success across the bridge with a program as a safe and dry program. I heard that today. I've taken some great notes, or taken some notes on some great comments. Safe and dry programs allow people to remain in the homes they have versus find new homes. I've had a little bit of success across the bridge putting a small home series in place. So what is an alternative to a mobile home? And could that be a pre-approved design type? Could it be a pre-approved building permit that is easier to apply for? I've had some success there, and I've also had some success trying to put the policy together to tie an incentive intentionally in the directed outcome that the community desires. So small home series, and with that, an abatement of permit fees, perhaps a payment of impact fees and some things like that. So it's going back to tie the, placing an incentive towards the policy. And one of my notes was in somewhere a couple pages ago, is, does this work? I haven't found that density bonuses work. I haven't found that policy alone solves the problem. I wrote a note here, and here's what I think the problem is, and by no means am I an expert in housing financing, but subsidy financing for office and residential conversion is the greatest challenge, right? There are private sector equity and debt financing that exists for market rate. It doesn't always exist for these creative solutions. The adaptive reuse of commercial to residential sounds great, but sprinkling a building, having different ingress and egress, all the different building codes that go along with that conversion are so expensive, and a strong source of financing other than private equity doesn't always exist that easily. And so we have some work to do. Here's what I think. You want my strong opinion on it. We have so much going for us on this island, right? People want to be here. In fact, they wait 45 minutes every morning to come to work here. So there's a lot of places out there that's not going on. There are people that want to be on the island working. There's so much opportunity here. The referendum question, I always look to see others, definitely in the state, to see who's done it well. And I know that Charleston put together a referendum program, so to speak, a framework for a referendum. And that model is consistent year over year, and it doesn't go away when a town manager leaves or the election results change. So I think there's some benefit to that. Simply bringing forward more density bonus or more local policy. I really appreciated Councilman Lennox's point. I wrote it down when he was bringing it up, at least in my words. Have we exhausted the local policy before we turn the page and try something else? That's a meet of staff with Jennifer, Sean, and Josh. Do people know that the density bonus is out there? Do people know that the adaptive reuse conversion is out there, and that we are standing here with the help wanted sign on the front window, open for business? Do folks know that? I think before I have any stronger opinions besides that, I would like to make sure that we're communicating, aka marketing, the policy before we're spending more dollars on it. The big question is, there's only so many dollars. Where do you want them targeted? I think that's for y'all to give me some advice on along the way. I think today's a big help. And in a couple weeks, I'm not sure how much more we can get done in 13 and a half days, but I know that we can have a little bit of this comment back from you all summarized with a little more information from staff. I think will be helpful 13 and a half days from now. So
Thank you, Mark. That's what I wanted to hear.
Okay, with that, motion to adjourn, Bill. Bill and
Move for
Thank you very much, everybody. I appreciate it.